The recruitment station buzzed with activity as beings from across the Galactic Coalition lined up to join the prestigious Void Rangers. Towering Krillian warriors flexed their forearms, their chitinous plates gleaming under the artificial lights. Sleek Zephyrian pilots discussed flight maneuvers in their melodic language, their translucent wings shimmering with each gesture. Even the hulking Gorvakians, known for their incredible strength, stood in formation with military precision. Then there was Elena Vasquez. At 5 feet 4 inches tall, the human woman looked like a child among giants. Her regulation jumpsuit hung loose on her slight frame, and her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She carried a single duffel bag and wore worn combat boots that had seen better days. When she approached the registration desk, the Altarian clerk's 6 eyes blinked in sequence, a clear sign of confusion. "Name and species?" the clerk asked in the standard Coalition tongue, his voice carrying the typical musical quality of his kind. "Elena Vasquez." "Human," she replied simply. The clerk's mandibles clicked softly as he searched his database. "Human, I'm not familiar with that classification. Are you perhaps a subspecies of Terran primate? We had one of those apply last cycle, though they were deemed unsuitable for combat roles." A ripple of laughter spread through the nearby recruits. A massive Krillian warrior, his carapace decorated with battle scars, turned to examine Elena with his compound eyes. "Look at this tiny creature," he chittered to his companions. "Does it think this is a clerical position posting?" More laughter erupted from the crowd. Even some of the more reserved species allowed themselves amused expressions. The Zephyrians tinkled like wind chimes in their version of mirth, while the Gorvakians rumbled with deep bass chuckles. Elena stood perfectly still, her expression unchanged. She had expected this reaction. Humans were still relatively new to the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago. Most species knew them only as curious explorers and surprisingly adaptable traders, not as warriors. "I'm here for combat certification," Elena said clearly, her voice cutting through the diminishing laughter. The Altarian clerk's feathered crest flattened against his skull, in what Elena recognized as the equivalent of raised eyebrows. "Combat certification? Young creature. Perhaps you should consider our support services division. We have excellent programs for logistics, communications, and medical assistance." "I want infantry training," Elena insisted, pulling out her application pad. "I've already passed the preliminary aptitude tests." The Krillian warrior who had first mocked her stepped closer, his massive frame casting a shadow over the human. Each of his arms was thicker than Elena's entire torso, and his natural armor could probably deflect small arms fire. "Little mammal," he said, his voice like grinding stone. "Do you have any idea what combat in the Void Rangers entails?" "We fight the Devourers in zero gravity. We assault fortified positions held by mechanical horrors that can tear through steel plating." "This is not a game." Elena looked up at him without flinching. "I'm aware of the requirements, Warrior Kazgoth." The use of his name, which she had read from his insignia, surprised him slightly. "I've studied every available combat report from the last 3 years of the Devourer conflicts." "Studying reports and facing plasma fire are very different things," interjected a Zephyrian pilot, her voice carrying the crystal-clear tones of her species. "No offense intended, but your kind lacks the natural advantages necessary for modern warfare. You have no armor plating, no redundant organs, no natural weapons. Your reaction times are adequate but not exceptional. Your strength is far below galactic average." Elena nodded slowly. "That's all true. But I'm not here to rely on natural advantages." "Then what exactly do you plan to fight with?" asked a Gorvakian sergeant, his voice like an avalanche contained in a throat. "Your species doesn't even have claws." "I want to requisition a kinetic rifle," Elena said simply. The laughter that erupted this time was even louder than before. Several species that Elena didn't recognize joined in, their various forms of amusement creating a cacophony of sounds. Kinetic rifles were considered obsolete technology, relics from a more primitive age when species still relied on projectile weapons instead of energy-based armaments. "A kinetic rifle?" the Altarian clerk repeated, his translator struggling with what seemed like an impossibly archaic request. "Those haven't been issued for frontline combat in over 200 years. Modern energy shields make projectile weapons essentially useless." "Not all projectile weapons," Elena said quietly, but her voice was lost in the continuing laughter. The Krillian warrior Kazgoth leaned down until his face was level with Elena's. His compound eyes reflected her image dozens of times, creating a kaleidoscope effect. Little human, even if we gave you an ancient kinetic weapon, what could you possibly accomplish with it? The Devourers have adaptive armor that can stop plasma bursts. What makes you think metal bullets would fare any better? Elena met his gaze steadily. Because I'm not planning to use metal bullets. Before anyone could ask what she meant, a new voice cut through the commotion like a blade through silk. What's all this noise about? The entire crowd fell silent instantly. Even the massive Krillian seemed to shrink slightly as a figure approached from the administration corridor. Elena recognized the rank insignia immediately. A coalition field officer. Someone who had not only survived multiple combat deployments but had excelled enough to earn a position training new recruits. The officer was Valdorian, a species Elena had only read about in military histories. Valdorians were rare, known for their analytical minds and their ability to remain calm under extreme pressure. This one was tall even by Valdorian standards, with the characteristic pale blue skin and silver markings that indicated high military rank. Her eyes were the deep purple of her species, and they seemed to take in every detail of the scene with a single glance. Officer Zarathis, the Altarian clerk said quickly, his crest flattening in respect. We have a new recruit with some unusual requests. The Valdorian officer's gaze fixed on Elena, who stood at attention despite not yet being officially enlisted. And what requests would those be, recruit? Permission to speak freely, ma'am? Elena asked. Granted. I'm requesting combat certification and a kinetic rifle for frontline deployment against Devourer forces. Officer Zarathis was quiet for a long moment, her purple eyes studying Elena with an intensity that made several nearby recruits uncomfortable. Finally she spoke, and her voice carried a strange undertone that Elena couldn't quite identify. A kinetic rifle. How interesting. The officer's silver markings seemed to shift slightly, a sign that Elena later learned indicated deep thought among Valdorians. Tell me, recruit, what do you know about the Black Talon mark? The laughter that had been building in the crowd died instantly. Several of the more experienced-looking recruits actually took a step back. Elena noticed the change in atmosphere but didn't understand its significance. I'm not familiar with that designation, ma'am, Elena admitted. Officer Zarathis nodded slowly. No, I don't suppose you would be. It's not something we advertise in our recruitment materials. She paused, still studying Elena with those unsettling purple eyes. Very well, recruit. You want a kinetic rifle? I'll see what we can arrange. Report to Training Bay 7 tomorrow at 0600 hours. Ma'am? With respect, the Krillian warrior Kazgoth interjected. Is it wise to waste training resources on Warrior Kazgoth? The officer's voice cut through his protest like ice. Are you questioning my judgment? The massive alien's mandibles clicked nervously. No, ma'am. Of course not, ma'am. Good, then I suggest you focus on your own training. Officer Zarathis turned back to Elena. Recruit Vasquez, you have your assignment. Don't be late. As the Valdorian officer walked away, Elena noticed that none of the other recruits were laughing anymore. Instead, they were looking at her with expressions she couldn't quite read. Some seemed curious, others concerned, and a few appeared almost afraid. Elena shouldered her duffel bag and headed toward the quarter's assignment desk, unaware that her simple request had just set in motion events that would change the course of the war against the Devourers forever. Training Bay 7 was unlike anything Elena had expected. While the other training facilities she had glimpsed were massive, open spaces filled with holographic targets and energy weapon ranges, this bay was smaller, more intimate, and strangely quiet. The walls were lined with weapons that Elena didn't recognize. Though some appeared to be variations of kinetic firearms from different worlds, Elena arrived at exactly 600 hours to find Officer Zarathis waiting for her, along with two other figures she hadn't seen before. One was a stocky, four-armed being that Elena recognized as a Thurvak engineer, his tool-laden harness marking him as a weapons specialist. The other was completely unfamiliar, humanoid but clearly not human, with skin that seemed to shift between different shades of gray and eyes that were solid black. Punctual, Officer Zarathis observed with approval. Recruit Vasquez, meet Master Armorer Grixnall and Combat Specialist Voidmarch. They will be assisting with your evaluation. Elena snapped to attention. Ma'am, yes ma'am. The Thurvak engineer Grixnall approached Elena with the rolling gait typical of his species. His forearms moved independently as he pulled various scanning devices from his harness. "So you're the human who wants the old ways," he said, his voice carrying the mechanical undertones that came from his species' cybernetic vocal modifications. "Interesting. Very interesting indeed." Voidmarch said nothing, but Elena could feel those solid black eyes studying her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. She had the distinct impression that this being was evaluating her as a predator might evaluate potential prey. "Before we proceed," Officer Zarathis said, activating a privacy shield that hummed to life around the bay, "I need to explain something about the Black Talon mark. What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels of Coalition Command." Elena nodded, though her curiosity was now mixed with growing apprehension. 200 years ago, when the Coalition first encountered the Devourers, our energy weapons were devastatingly effective. Plasma rifles, particle beams, fusion cannons, all of them could tear through Devourer forces with ease. The war seemed like it would be over quickly. The officer paused, her silver markings shifting to a pattern Elena was beginning to associate with grim memories. But the Devourers adapted. Within a single campaign season, they had developed energy-absorbing armor that rendered our most powerful weapons useless. Worse, they began incorporating our own energy signatures into their defensive systems. The more we shot at them, the stronger they became. Grixinal's multiple arms gestured expressively as he picked up the story. Coalition forces were being slaughtered. Entire battle groups were wiped out because their weapons were not just ineffective, they were actively feeding the enemy. High Command was desperate for alternatives. That's when the Black Talon project was initiated. Voidmarch spoke for the first time, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to bypass Elena's ears and resonate directly in her bones. A classified program to develop kinetic weapons that could bypass Devourer adaptations. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. "What happened to the project?" Officer Zarathis's expression grew even more serious. "It worked too well. The kinetic weapons developed under Black Talon were so effective against Devourers that they posed a strategic threat to the balance of power in the galaxy. Several Coalition member species demanded the program be terminated. Why? Elena asked, though she was beginning to suspect she didn't want to know the answer. Because the weapons weren't just effective against Devourers, Grixnal explained, his cybernetic voice dropping to what Elena assumed was a whisper. They were effective against everything. Energy shields, adaptive armor, even the supposedly impenetrable defensive systems of the core worlds. None of it mattered against Black Talon kinetic weapons. Voidmarch stepped closer to Elena, and she noticed that his footsteps made absolutely no sound. The project was officially terminated after a single field test. All weapons were destroyed, all research sealed, and all participants were either reassigned to other duties or... He let the sentence hang unfinished. But the knowledge remains, Officer Zarathis said quietly. Hidden in the deepest archives, accessible only to those with the highest clearance levels. And now we face a new crisis. Elena waited, sensing that the real reason for her presence here was about to be revealed. 3 months ago, a Devourer fleet appeared in the Nexus sector with new adaptive capabilities. The officer continued. They're not just absorbing energy weapon attacks anymore, they're redirecting them. Our own plasma fire is being turned against us with deadly precision. Conventional tactics are not just failing, they're suicidal. Grixnal's forearms worked simultaneously as he began assembling something on a nearby workbench. High Command has quietly authorized the resurrection of Black Talon research. But there's a problem. Most of the scientists who worked on the original project are dead or missing, Voidmarch added. The few survivors are either too old to return to active duty or have refused to participate. Elena began to understand where this was heading. So you need someone new, someone who can be trained from scratch. Not just someone, Officer Zarathis corrected. Someone whose species has a natural aptitude for kinetic weapons. Someone whose evolutionary background includes thousands of years of projectile weapon development. Humans, Elena said softly. Humans, the officer confirmed. Your species spent millennia perfecting the art of throwing sharp objects at your enemies. You developed firearms centuries before achieving spaceflight. You have an intuitive understanding of trajectory, wind compensation, and kinetic energy transfer that most species never develop because they move directly to energy weapons. Grixinal finished his assembly work and turned around. holding something that made Elena's breath catch. It was a rifle, but unlike any she had ever seen. The basic configuration was recognizable: stock, barrel, trigger assembly. But the materials and construction were clearly of alien origin. The metal seemed to shift and flow like liquid while maintaining its solid form, and power conduits ran along the barrel in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "This," the Thurvac engineer said with obvious pride, "is a Mark 7 Black Talon kinetic rifle. It fires projectiles at velocities approaching 10% of light speed. The ammunition is composed of materials that exist in quantum superposition until impact, allowing them to bypass conventional defenses." Elena stared at the weapon, feeling a mixture of awe and terror. "What's the catch?" Voidmarch's black eyes seemed to glitter with something that might have been amusement. "The catch is that Black Talon weapons are bonded to their users. Once the neural interface is established, no one else can fire the weapon. If the user dies, the weapon becomes permanently inert. And if you accept this assignment," Officer Zarathus added, "you will be permanently classified. Your existence will be erased from all public records. As far as the galaxy is concerned, Elena Vasquez will have washed out of basic training and returned to Earth in disgrace." Elena looked at each of them in turn, then back at the rifle. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "We're asking you to become something that doesn't officially exist," the officer said. "A Black Talon operative. You'll receive training that no one else in the galaxy has access to. You'll use weapons that are theoretically impossible, and you'll fight in battles that will never be recorded in any history book." Grixinal's arms moved in what Elena recognized as the Thurvac equivalent of a shrug. "You wanted a kinetic rifle. This is your chance to have the most advanced kinetic weapon ever created. But understand," Voidmarch added, his voice carrying new undertones of warning, "once you cross this threshold, there is no return. You will become a weapon pointed at the heart of the Devourer threat. You will be alone in the dark, fighting enemies that most beings can't even imagine." Elena stared at the rifle for a long moment, thinking about the laughter from the other recruits, the dismissive comments about human weakness, the assumption that her species was unsuited for real combat. Then she thought about the Devourers, the mechanical horrors that had been consuming entire worlds, leaving nothing but empty space and twisted metal in their wake. "If I do this," she said slowly, "will it make a difference? Can one person with one weapon really change the course of a war?" Officer Zarathus's silver markings shifted to a pattern Elena had never seen before, but somehow understood represented absolute certainty. Recruit Vasquez, the original Black Talon field test involved a single operative with a single weapon. That operative eliminated an entire Devourer battle group in under 6 minutes. Elena reached out and touched the rifle's stock. The moment her skin made contact with the alien metal, she felt something like an electric shock run up her arm, but it wasn't painful. It was almost like recognition, as if the weapon had been waiting for her specifically. "What happened to that operative?" she asked. The silence that followed was answer enough. Elena lifted the rifle, surprised by how perfectly it fit her hands despite being designed with alien technology. "When do we start?" Officer Zarathus smiled, the first genuine expression of emotion Elena had seen from her. "We already have." The first Devourer to reach Elena's position was a Hunter-class unit, standing 12 feet tall with 6 multi-jointed legs that allowed it to move across any terrain with spider-like grace. Its torso was a fusion of organic tissue and mechanical components, with sensor arrays that glowed an ominous red. Most terrifying were its arms. One ended in a plasma cannon that could melt through starship armor, while the other sprouted razor-sharp appendages that could slice through reinforced steel. Elena's training kicked in before her conscious mind could process the threat. She dropped to one knee, brought the Black Talon rifle to her shoulder, and acquired her target through the weapon's neural interface. The rifle felt alive in her hands, its quantum processors calculating trajectory, wind speed, target movement, and a dozen other variables in microseconds. She squeezed the trigger. The projectile that left the barrel was invisible to the naked eye, moving so fast that it seemed to simply teleport from the rifle to the target. One moment the Hunter-class Devourer was bearing down on her position with mechanical precision. The next moment, there was a perfectly circular hole through its central processor, and the massive creature collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. "Excellent shot." Officer Zarathus's voice crackled through Elena's helmet comm. But that was just the warm-up. Here come the real challenges. The holographic landscape around Elena shifted and changed, showing her a battlefield from the actual war. She was now standing on the rubble-strewn surface of Kepler 442b, a world that had fallen to the Devourer 6 months earlier. In the distance, she could see the twisted spires of a Devourer processing facility, where the mechanical horrors converted raw matter into more of their kind. Your mission? Voidmarch's voice spoke directly into her mind through the rifle's neural link. Is to infiltrate the facility and destroy the primary conversion matrix. Intelligence estimates the facility contains approximately 300 Devourer units of various classes. Elena felt her mouth go dry. 300? In training simulations, Coalition forces typically needed a full battle group to assault a facility that size. Coalition forces don't have black Talon weapons. Grixnell's mechanically enhanced voice reminded her. The rifle you're carrying has capabilities that conventional weapons cannot match, but you'll need to learn to use them properly. As if summoned by his words, a pack of runner-class Devourers crested a nearby hill. These were smaller than the hunter she had just destroyed, but they moved with terrifying speed, their 4 legs covering ground in bounding leaps that would have outpaced most Coalition vehicles. There were at least 20 of them, and they were spreading out to surround her position. Elena's training sessions over the past 3 weeks had covered this scenario. She activated the rifle's multi-target acquisition system and felt her consciousness expand in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Through the weapon's neural interface, she could perceive the battlefield from multiple angles simultaneously, tracking each target's movement while calculating optimal firing solutions. She began firing. The Black Talon rifle's rate of fire was limited only by Elena's ability to acquire and engage targets. Each shot was perfectly placed, each projectile finding its mark with supernatural accuracy. The quantum-enhanced ammunition passed through the runner's adaptive armor as if it didn't exist, destroying vital systems with surgical precision. In less than 30 seconds, 20 Devourer units lay motionless on the alien landscape. Impressive, Officer Zarathis observed. But now the facility's defensive systems are aware of your presence. Expect heavier resistance. The ground beneath Elena's feet began to vibrate, and she looked up to see something that made her blood run cold. A Titan-class Devourer was emerging from the processing facility, its massive form dwarfing even the largest Coalition battle mechs. This was a creature of nightmares, a fusion of biology and technology that stood nearly 100 feet tall. Its multiple weapon systems included energy cannons, missile pods, and close combat, appendages that could tear through armored vehicles like tissue, paper. Target analysis indicates the Titan's core processor is located in its central thorax. The rifle's AI system informed her through the neural link. However, the processor is protected by 3 layers of adaptive shielding and regenerative armor plating. Elena studied the massive creature as it began moving in her direction, its footsteps creating small earthquakes with each impact. What kind of ammunition do I need for something like that? The rifle's fabrication system can produce specialized rounds, Grixnell explained, but each type requires different neural patterns to activate. You'll need to learn to think in ways that human minds aren't naturally designed for. Elena felt the rifle's interface probe deeper into her consciousness, accessing memories and thought patterns she didn't even know existed. Suddenly she understood. The Black Talon weapon wasn't just a tool. It was a symbiotic organism that merged with its user's mind, allowing them to think beyond the limitations of their species. She visualized the ammunition she needed, quantum phase penetrators that could exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously, allowing them to bypass conventional defenses by attacking from angles that technically didn't exist in normal spacetime. The rifle hummed with new energy as its fabrication system began creating the impossible ammunition. Elena could feel the weapon drawing power from sources she couldn't identify, tapping into the fundamental forces of the universe itself. She aimed at the Titan's center mass and fired. The projectile that emerged from the rifle wasn't visible in any conventional sense. It existed as a probability wave, a quantum uncertainty that collapsed into deadly reality only upon impact. The Titan's multiple layers of shielding detected the incoming threat and activated, but they were defending against something that was simultaneously approaching from every direction, and no direction at all. The penetrator struck the Titan's core processor with devastating effect. For a moment, the massive creature seemed frozen in place. Then its entire structure began to collapse inward as its fundamental systems failed catastrophically. Elena watched in amazement as a 100-foot-tall engine of destruction crumpled like a house of cards. How is that possible? Black Talon weapons don't just fire projectiles, Voidmarch explained, his voice carrying new notes of respect. They fire concepts, ideas given physical form. The penetrator you just used was based on the quantum mechanical principle of superposition. It attacked the target's probability of existing. The implications of what she had just done began to sink in. Elena wasn't just carrying a weapon. She was wielding fundamental forces of reality itself. The responsibility was staggering. The Devourers have detected the quantum signature, Officer Zarathus warned. Expect immediate retaliation. The sky above Elena began to darken as atmospheric processors descended from orbit. These were massive machines designed to convert planetary atmospheres into forms suitable for Devourer reproduction. Each one was essentially a flying city, bristling with defensive systems and manufacturing capabilities. Standard protocol for dealing with atmospheric processors is orbital bombardment, Elena said, watching the massive machines descend. I don't think a rifle is going to be effective against something that size. Standard protocol assumes standard weapons, Grixnell replied. You're not using standard weapons anymore. Elena felt the rifle's AI system probe her mind again, this time accessing memories of her childhood on Earth. She remembered watching storms roll across the prairies, the way lightning could split the sky from horizon to horizon. She remembered her grandfather explaining how electricity always found the path of least resistance. Understanding flooded through her consciousness like lightning itself. The rifle began fabricating a new type of ammunition, something that existed as pure electromagnetic potential until the moment of impact. Elena aimed not at the atmospheric processors themselves, but at the space between them. She fired a single shot that bloomed into a web of quantum lightning, creating a cascading chain reaction that jumped from processor to processor like electricity, arcing between conductors. Within seconds, all 7 massive machines were falling from the sky, their systems overloaded by energies that bypassed every defensive system they possessed. The training simulation ended abruptly, leaving Elena standing in the peaceful confines of Training Bay 7. But the rifle in her hand still hummed with residual energy, and she could feel its neural interface maintaining its connection to her consciousness. Evaluation complete, Officer Zarathus announced, though her voice carried a note of something that might have been awe. Recruit Vasquez, Operative Vasquez, you have just completed a training scenario that typically requires 3 months of preparation. You accomplished it in 47 minutes. Elena looked down at the rifle, then back at her instructors. When do I deploy? Tomorrow, Voidmarch said simply. Intelligence indicates a Devourer fleet is massing in the Vega system. If they complete their current operation, they'll have enough resources to launch a direct assault on the core worlds. Elena nodded, though she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the bay's environmental controls. What's my mission? Officer Zarathus's silver markings shifted to a pattern Elena now recognized as grim determination. The insertion ship's silent approach was unlike any vessel Elena had seen during her brief time with the Coalition military. Where standard ships were designed for crew comfort and efficiency, this craft existed solely for stealth and infiltration. Its hull was composed of materials that bent light around them, making the ship effectively invisible to most detection systems. The interior was cramped and Spartan, with barely enough space for Elena and her equipment. Captain Thiara, a Zephyrian pilot whose translucent wings had been modified with technological enhancements, briefed Elena as they approached the Vega system. Intelligence reports indicate the Devourer fleet consists of 17 capital ships, 43 destroyers, and approximately 200 support vessels. They're positioned around Vega Prime, converting the planet's mass into raw materials for fleet expansion. Elena studied the tactical display, feeling the weight of her mission settling on her shoulders. How am I supposed to engage an entire fleet? Even with the Black Talon rifle, I'm still just one person. That's where these come in, Captain Thiara said, gesturing to a series of metallic pods secured in the ship's cargo hold. Quantum insertion capsules. They'll deliver you directly to key targets while maintaining stealth protocols. Elena examined the pods more closely. Each one was barely large enough for a single person, and they looked disturbingly like coffins. "How many targets are we talking about?" "7 primary objectives," the captain replied. Her wing membranes shifting to patterns Elena had learned indicated serious concentration. The fleet's command ship, 3 resource processing vessels, 2 manufacturing platforms, and the planetary conversion array on Vega Prime itself. The scope of the mission was staggering. Elena would need to infiltrate and destroy 7 separate installations, each one heavily defended and crawling with Devourer units. Under normal circumstances, such an operation would require a full coalition battle fleet and thousands of personnel. "Captain," Elena said slowly, "has anyone ever attempted a solo operation on this scale before?" Thiara's compound eyes reflected the tactical display's glow as she considered the question. The original Black Talon operative conducted a similar mission during the program's initial field test. Single-handed destruction of a Devourer battle group consisting of 12 capital ships and support vessels. And what happened to that operative? The captain's wing membranes went completely still. The mission was successful. The operative did not survive to report the details. Elena felt a chill run down her spine, but she pushed the fear aside. The Black Talon rifle at her side pulsed with gentle warmth, its neural interface providing subtle reassurance through their shared connection. She had trained with the weapon for weeks now, and she was beginning to understand its true capabilities. "Approaching insertion point," Captain Thiara announced. "Preparing quantum displacement sequence." Elena climbed into the first insertion pod, feeling the Black Talon rifle's neural connection adjust to maintain contact, even through the pod's shielding. As the capsule sealed around her, she activated the weapon's advanced targeting systems and began studying her first objective. The Devourer fleet's command ship. The Entropy's Edge was a massive vessel that served as both flagship and mobile command center for the entire Devourer fleet. Its hull was a disturbing fusion of organic tissue and mechanical systems, constantly shifting and adapting to new threats. Intelligence reports indicated it housed the collective consciousness matrix that coordinated all Devourer operations in the system. Elena's insertion pod launched from the silent approach with no sound or visible exhaust. The quantum displacement drive allowed it to exist in a state of probability flux, making it effectively undetectable until the moment of arrival. She used the transit time to prepare her mind for what lay ahead, allowing the rifle's AI systems to brief her on Devourer ship layouts and defensive systems. Target analysis complete. The rifle's synthesized voice spoke directly into her consciousness. The collective consciousness matrix is located in the ship's central core, protected by 7 layers of adaptive defenses. Recommended approach: vertical insertion through the ship's organic hull sections. The insertion pod materialized inside the command ship's outer hull with a soft quantum whisper. Elena found herself in a nightmare landscape of pulsing organic corridors and mechanical augmentations. The walls themselves seemed alive, covered with nerve-like conduits that carried information throughout the ship. The air was thick with an oily mist that made her skin crawl. Elena activated her armor's stealth systems and began moving toward the ship's core, using the rifle's enhanced sensors to navigate the alien architecture. The Black Talon weapon guided her around patrol routes and sensor networks with an efficiency that bordered on prescience. Her first encounter came unexpectedly. A maintenance-class Devourer rounded a corner directly in front of her, its multiple sensory appendages sweeping the area. Unlike the combat units she had faced in training, this creature was designed for ship operations, smaller, more agile, but equipped with internal repair systems that made it nearly indestructible through conventional means. Elena's response was instinctive. She visualized ammunition designed to disrupt the creature's repair protocols, quantum-encoded projectiles that would introduce fatal errors into its self-maintenance systems. The rifle fabricated the specialized rounds instantly, and Elena fired a single shot that passed through the creature's central processor. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the maintenance unit began to convulse as its repair systems turned against it, interpreting its own vital components as damage to be eliminated. Within seconds, the creature had literally disassembled itself at the molecular level. Elena continued deeper into the ship, encountering increasingly sophisticated defenses. The Devourers had learned from previous encounters with coalition forces. implementing adaptive countermeasures that shifted their strategies in real time. But they had never faced anything like the Black Talon rifle. When a squad of Guardian-class units detected her presence, Elena didn't try to hide. Instead, she allowed the rifle's consciousness to merge more fully with her own, accessing tactical algorithms that existed beyond normal human comprehension. She moved through the corridor like a force of nature, each shot precisely calculated to exploit weaknesses that shouldn't have existed. The Guardian units fired back with plasma weapons and kinetic rounds, but Elena was no longer quite where their sensors indicated. The rifle's quantum field generators created probability shadows, making her exist in multiple locations simultaneously, until the moment she chose to collapse the waveform by firing. She reached the collective consciousness matrix, to find it protected by something unprecedented. A living wall of devourer tissue that could adapt to any attack in real time. The moment Elena's rifle targeted it, the wall began shifting its molecular structure to counter quantum projectiles. Adaptive defenses detected. The rifle's AI informed her. Conventional Black Talon ammunition will be ineffective within 30 seconds. Elena smiled grimly. Then we'll use unconventional ammunition. She reached deeper into the rifle's consciousness than she had ever gone before, accessing weapon protocols that carried warnings about permanent psychological damage. Elena fabricated rounds that existed as pure paradox, projectiles that were simultaneously fired and not fired, creating logical impossibilities that the wall's adaptive systems couldn't process. The collective consciousness matrix exploded in a shower of sparks and organic matter. Throughout the command ship, Devourer units began shutting down as their coordination network collapsed, 6 targets remaining. Elena's extraction pod retrieved her from the dying command ship and immediately launched toward her next objective, the primary resource processing vessel Infinite Hunger. This ship was converting Vega Prime's mass into raw materials, stripping entire continents down to bedrock and feeding the matter into molecular disassembly arrays. The approach to Infinite Hunger presented new challenges. Without the command ship's coordination, the remaining Devourer vessels had activated autonomous defense protocols. Energy weapons created a deadly web of fire around each ship, while swarms of fighter-class units patrolled the surrounding space. Elena's insertion pod used quantum tunneling to bypass the defensive perimeter, materializing inside the processing vessel's cargo hold. She found herself surrounded by mountains of processed materials, rare metals, crystalline matrices, and organic compounds that had once been part of a living world. Target analysis indicates the molecular disassembly arrays are located in Processing Bay 7, the rifle reported. Warning: the bay is flooded with industrial nanobots that will attempt to convert any organic matter they encounter. Elena activated her armor's full environmental protection and made her way through corridors filled with the constant sound of grinding machinery. The Infinite Hunger was less ship than factory, its passages lined with conveyor systems that carried planetary matter through various stages of refinement. The nanobots detected her presence the moment she entered Processing Bay 7. They swarmed toward her like a metallic cloud, each microscopic robot programmed to break down organic matter into component molecules. The quantum collapse round tore a hole in reality itself. Elena felt the universe twist around her as fundamental forces that held matter together simply ceased to function. The planetary conversion array didn't explode. It unraveled, its component atoms forgetting how to maintain coherent structure. The destruction spread outward in a sphere of absolute nothingness that consumed everything it touched. But something impossible happened in those final microseconds. As the collapse field reached Elena's position, the Black Talon rifle made a choice. Its quantum consciousness merged so completely with Elena's mind that they had become a single entity, refused to accept her destruction. The weapon channeled every remaining particle of energy in its power cells to create a temporal displacement bubble around Elena's body. She didn't die. She simply stopped existing in that particular moment of space-time. Elena found herself floating in a void that wasn't quite darkness and wasn't quite light. Around her, fragments of memory and possibility drifted like cosmic debris. She could see echoes of her training with Officer Zarathus, shadows of the battles she had fought, and glimpses of futures that might never come to pass. Temporal displacement successful, the rifle's voice spoke directly into her consciousness. though the weapon itself was nowhere to be seen. Current location, quantum probability space. Duration of displacement, approximately 4.7 minutes of standard time. Elena tried to move but found that conventional physics had no meaning in this place. What happened to Vega Prime? Planetary conversion array destroyed. Devourer fleet eliminated. Mission accomplished with 97% efficiency rating. Even in this impossible space, Elena felt a surge of satisfaction. She had done it. A single human with an impossible weapon had destroyed an entire Devourer fleet that could have conquered half the galaxy. But victory came with a price. Can you get me out of here? Elena asked. The rifle's consciousness seemed to hesitate, which was disturbing given its usual instantaneous responses. Extraction from quantum probability space requires significant energy expenditure. Current power reserves are insufficient for full temporal restoration. Elena understood what the weapon wasn't saying directly. But you can get me back to normal spacetime? Affirmative. However, the process will result in temporal fragmentation. You will return to baseline reality, but not necessarily to your original timeline. Elena considered her options. She could remain in this quantum void, existing as a probability rather than a person, or she could accept extraction to an unknown version of reality. Either choice was particularly appealing. What's the worst-case scenario for temporal fragmentation? She asked. You could emerge in a timeline where the Devourer threat never existed, where humanity never achieved spaceflight, or where the fundamental laws of physics operate differently. Alternatively, you might return to a reality where your actions at Vega Prime created unintended consequences that altered the course of galactic civilization. Elena floated in the probability void for what felt like hours, though time had no meaning in this place. Finally, she made her decision. Execute extraction. Full temporal restoration. Best possible outcome. Warning. Extraction will permanently damage Rifle's quantum consciousness matrix. Future Black Talon operations will be severely compromised. Elena felt a pang of loss at the thought of losing her connection to the weapon that had become an extension of her very soul. But she also understood that her mission was larger than any single battle. If her sacrifice could preserve the Rifle's capabilities for future operations, then it was worth making. Understood. Begin extraction sequence. Reality reasserted itself with violent intensity. Elena found herself lying on the metal deck of an unfamiliar ship, surrounded by beings she didn't recognize. The Black Talon rifle lay beside her, its once fluid surface now locked into a rigid, crystalline structure that hurt to look at directly. A Valdorian officer leaned over her, but it wasn't Officer Zarathis. This individual's silver markings were arranged in patterns Elena had never seen before, and her purple eyes held depths of knowledge that seemed almost ancient. Operative Vasquez, the stranger said, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated with authority. I am Admiral Kethmara of the Coalition Temporal Research Division. You have been missing for approximately 6 months. Elena struggled to sit up, her body feeling strange and disconnected. 6 months? The displacement was supposed to last less than 5 minutes. In your original timeline, yes. But your quantum collapse round at Vega Prime created temporal distortions that rippled throughout this sector of space. We've been tracking the after effects, trying to locate and recover you. Elena looked around the ship's medical bay, noting technology that seemed more advanced than anything she remembered from Coalition vessels. What happened after Vega Prime? Did the mission succeed? Admiral Kethmara's silver markings shifted to a pattern Elena interpreted as deep satisfaction. Your destruction of the Devourer fleet prevented their planned assault on the core worlds. More importantly, analysis of the quantum collapse effects has led to breakthroughs in temporal weaponry that have revolutionized our defensive capabilities. Then why do you look so concerned? Helena asked, noting the tension in the Admiral's posture. Because your actions have created complications we didn't anticipate, the Admiral replied. The temporal distortions from Vega Prime have attracted attention from entities that exist outside normal spacetime. We're dealing with threats that make the Devourers look like minor nuisances. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of entities? Beings that feed on temporal paradoxes and quantum instabilities. Your quantum collapse round created a beacon that announced our universe's location to predators we never knew existed. The Admiral paused, her markings shifting to patterns of grim determination. We need your help to deal with them. Elena looked down at the crystallized Black Talon rifle. Its surface was completely inert, showing no signs of the quantum consciousness that had once dwelt within it. The rifle is dead. Its AI sacrificed itself to extract me from probability space. We know, Admiral Kethamara said softly, but you're not the same person who went into that void. The temporal displacement process has fundamentally altered your neural structure. You've become something new, something that exists partially outside normal space-time. Elena held up her hand and was startled to see that her skin seemed to flicker between different states of existence. Sometimes it appeared completely normal, but in other moments she could see through it to the underlying quantum structures that held her atoms together. "What am I?" she whispered. "You're the first human to survive complete temporal fragmentation," the Admiral explained. "The displacement process has given you abilities that we're still trying to understand. You can perceive probability streams, manipulate quantum states through direct mental interface, and exist in multiple timelines simultaneously." Elena stood up, testing her new perceptions. She could see the ship around her as it existed in the present, but she could also perceive shadows of its past and glimpses of its possible futures. The sensation was overwhelming and exhilarating at the same time. "And the temporal predators you mentioned?" Elena asked. Admiral Kethamara gestured toward the ship's observation deck, where a massive viewing screen showed the space around them. Elena looked out at what should have been empty void and instead saw something that made her modified consciousness recoil in instinctive fear. Massive shapes moved through space, but they weren't quite in the same dimension as normal matter. They seemed to exist in the gaps between moments, feeding on the energy released when cause and effect became disconnected. Each creature was larger than a coalition dreadnought, with forms that shifted between states of existence like living quantum equations. "They started appearing 3 months ago," the Admiral explained. "Every attempt to engage them with conventional weapons has failed. Energy attacks pass through them harmlessly, and kinetic weapons can't achieve target lock on something that exists in temporal flux." Elena studied the creatures, her transformed perceptions allowing her to see aspects of their nature that normal beings couldn't perceive. "They're not really predators," she said slowly. "They're antibodies." "Antibodies?" "The universe has immune systems to protect itself from paradoxes and temporal instabilities. My quantum collapse round damaged the fundamental structure of space-time in this region. These beings are trying to repair that damage by eliminating the source of the instability." Admiral Kethamara's markings shifted to patterns of alarm. "Are you saying they're here to eliminate you?" Elena smiled, feeling power flowing through her transformed consciousness like electricity through superconductors. "They're welcome to try. But first I need a new rifle." The weapon that Master Armorer Grixnell presented to Elena 3 days later was unlike anything that had ever existed in the galaxy. Where the original Black Talon rifle had been a fusion of technology and consciousness, this new creation was something far more ambitious. A weapon designed to be wielded by someone who existed partially outside normal reality. "We call it the Paradox Engine," Grixnell explained, his forearms moving in complex patterns as he outlined the weapon's capabilities. "It doesn't fire projectiles in any conventional sense. Instead, it fires possibilities, alternative versions of reality where the target has already been destroyed." Elena examined the weapon, noting that its crystalline structure seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. When she looked at it directly, she saw a rifle, but her peripheral vision caught glimpses of other configurations: a blade that could cut through time itself, a shield that deflected probability, a key that could unlock hidden dimensions. "How does it work?" Elena asked, though part of her consciousness already understood the answer. "You don't aim it at what is," Admiral Kethamara explained, her silver markings displaying patterns of barely contained excitement. "You aim it at what could be. The weapon creates branching timelines where different outcomes occur, then selects the timeline where your target ceases to exist." Elena lifted the Paradox Engine, feeling its quantum consciousness merge with her own transformed neural structure. The connection was deeper and more intimate than anything she had experienced with the original Black Talon rifle. This weapon didn't just respond to her thoughts, it anticipated them, operating on levels of reality that existed beyond normal causation. "Field testing will have to wait," Admiral Kethamara said, her attention turning to the tactical displays around them. "The temporal antibodies have begun moving toward inhabited systems. If they reach the core worlds, They'll eliminate every trace of advanced technology in their attempt to sterilize the quantum contamination. Elena studied the tactical display, watching the massive entities move through space in patterns that followed rules she was only beginning to understand. They're not just moving randomly. They're following probability streams, tracing the quantum distortions back to their source. Which is you, the Admiral said bluntly. Which is me, Elena agreed. So I need to give them a target they can actually engage. Elena's plan was elegantly simple and completely insane. Instead of trying to fight the temporal antibodies in normal space, where they held every advantage, she would draw them into the quantum, probability dimension where her own transformed consciousness could operate without limitations. The process required her to voluntarily fragment her existence across multiple timelines, creating quantum echoes of herself that the antibodies would be compelled to pursue. Each echo would lead them deeper into probability space, where Elena could confront them on equal terms. The risk is catastrophic, Admiral Kethamara warned, as Elena prepared for the transition. If you lose coherence in probability space, you'll be scattered across infinite timelines. There will be no way to recover you. Elena smiled, the paradox engine humming with anticipation in her hands. Admiral, I've been dead for 6 months and existing in multiple realities simultaneously. I think I can handle a little quantum fragmentation. The transition into probability space was like diving into an ocean of pure mathematics. Elena felt her consciousness expand across dozens of potential timelines, each one showing a different version of the conflict with the temporal antibodies. In some timelines, she succeeded in defeating them. In others, she failed catastrophically, taking entire sectors of space with her. Her job was to navigate toward the timelines where victory was possible while avoiding the branches that led to universal destruction. The temporal antibodies followed her quantum signature into probability space, their massive forms adapting to the strange physics of this dimension. Here they appeared as they truly were, living equations designed to solve the problem of paradox by eliminating the variables that created instability. Elena's first shot with the paradox engine created a ripple effect across 17 different timelines. In one branch of reality, the weapon fired a bolt of crystallized causality that unmade one of the antibodies by convincing the universe that it had never existed. In another timeline, the shot opened a gateway to a dimension where mathematics operated differently, creating logical contradictions that the antibody couldn't process. But the temporal antibodies adapted quickly, beginning to operate across multiple probability streams simultaneously. They were learning to think like Elena, spreading their consciousness across different timelines to anticipate her attacks. The battle that followed existed on levels of reality that normal minds couldn't perceive. Elena and the antibodies fought with weapons made of pure concept, manipulating the fundamental rules that governed existence itself. She fired rounds composed of temporal paradoxes, creating situations where the antibodies were destroyed before they had been created. They retaliated by attempting to erase her from the quantum record, removing all evidence that Elena Vasquez had ever existed. The conflict raged across probability space for what felt like centuries. Though time had no consistent meaning in this dimension, Elena began to understand that the antibodies weren't evil. They were simply performing their function, trying to maintain the stability of reality itself. Her quantum collapse round at Vega Prime had created genuine damage to the universe's structure, and these entities were the natural response to that injury. But understanding their purpose didn't make them any less dangerous. If they succeeded in their mission to eliminate quantum contamination, they would effectively sterilize entire sectors of space, reducing advanced civilizations to primitive states where temporal paradoxes couldn't occur. Elena's breakthrough came when she realized that she didn't need to destroy the antibodies. She needed to heal the damage that had summoned them. Using the paradox engine's reality manipulation capabilities, she began reconstructing the quantum structure that her previous actions had damaged. It was like performing surgery on the universe itself. Elena had to carefully restore the causal relationships that held space-time together, while avoiding the creation of new paradoxes that would make the situation worse. The work required her to think in ways that pushed even her transformed consciousness to its limits. The temporal antibodies sensed what she was doing and moved to stop her, but Elena had learned to anticipate their responses. She created quantum decoys of herself across multiple timelines, drawing their attention away from her real work. The paradox engine fired continuously, each shot creating new branches of possibility that confused the antibody's targeting systems. Slowly, painstakingly, Elena began to repair the quantum damage. The gaping wound in space-time that her quantum collapse round had created started to close, its edges knitting together as she restored the proper mathematical relationships between cause and effect. As the repair work neared completion, the temporal antibodies began to change. Their aggressive behavior diminished as they sensed that the threat they had been created to address was being resolved. Instead of attacking Elena, they began to assist her, their vast consciousnesses adding computational power to her restoration efforts. When the work was finally finished, Elena found herself floating in normal space again, the paradox engine quiet in her hands. The temporal antibodies had vanished, their purpose fulfilled. Around her, space looked exactly as it had before the crisis began, but Elena's enhanced perceptions could see the subtle differences, the quantum scars that marked where reality had been damaged and then healed. Admiral Kethmara's ship materialized nearby, its sensors finally able to detect Elena's presence now that she had returned to baseline reality. Operative Vasquez, the Admiral's voice crackled through the comm system. Report status. Elena looked down at herself and was surprised to see that she appeared completely normal again. The quantum fragmentation that had marked her existence for months was gone, her consciousness restored to a single timeline. Only the paradox engine remained as evidence of what she had become. Mission accomplished, Elena said simply. The temporal contamination has been neutralized. The antibodies have returned to whatever dimension they came from. And your condition? The Admiral asked. Elena flexed her fingers, testing her connection to normal reality. She was human again, mostly. But she retained the knowledge of what it felt like to exist across multiple timelines. And the paradox engine still responded to her thoughts with an intimacy that suggested their bond was permanent. I'm operational, Elena replied, though I suspect I'm going to need new training protocols. Admiral Kethmara's laughter echoed across the comm channel. Operative Vasquez, I think it's time we discussed your promotion to the Temporal Defense Division. It seems we're going to need specialists who can handle threats that exist outside normal spacetime. Elena smiled, shouldering the paradox engine and preparing for extraction. Admiral, I thought you should know. Officially, I still don't exist. Officially, the Admiral replied. Neither does the Temporal Defense Division. Welcome to the next level of warfare, Operative. Try not to break any more universes.